Hi, PJ Scott here with another Veterans Forum. And as many of you know, I have actually dug up some Civil War veterans. Well, kinda. These guys are representing the Confederate point of view for this segment of Veterans Forum. They belong to the Washington Civil War Reenactment Group. And we're looking forward to talking to them. Get your VCR, get it taping, folks. Hi, I want to introduce my guest today. They're with the Civil War Association in the state of Washington. There aren't any Civil War veterans alive anymore, although I imagine they might have one or two children floating around that would be quite elderly. I have Brian Canutt, and tell us what your rank is, Brian.
I'm a captain.
You are a captain, okay. And then here we have his superior officer, Lieutenant Colonel Frank Starr, but you actually have a persona. Tell us about that persona. Tell us the name and how you formulated this. Is this an ancestor?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
It's Lieutenant Colonel William Wilson. He actually was a captain in the Civil War. But I took his persona. He's actually a compilation of several of my ancestors that fought for the Confederacy. I had family that fought on both sides, but the greater majority of my family members fought for North Carolina. I had members in the 2nd, the 22nd, and the 26th North Carolina.
Now, did your family write a detailed history so you've got the straight scoop? Because mine's kind of checky. I have, all my father's family was those damn Yankees, according to my mother. And my mother's side was all Confederate, so I come from a mixed background too. But do you have detailed history?
Yes, my mom and I have actually done extensive genealogy on our family, and we've actually traced her side of the family all the way back to Scotland. And then in this country, prior to the Revolutionary War. On the Confederate side, we actually had 5 relatives that died at Gettysburg. And then we have 2 others that were captured and spent most of the war in prisoner of war camp in the North. Actually in Maryland, where I was born and raised. On the Union side, we only had 2 relatives that we've been able to find that actually fought in the war. The other part of my father's side of the family were arms manufacturers for the Union forces.
Oh, okay. Well, talking about Scotland, here is a picture of my, one of many of my Civil War ancestors. I just simply don't have pictures of all of them. This is my great-grandfather, Everett Edward Scott, and he came from Scotland when he was 9 years old. He was a cabin boy, and I always had this sense that he was supposed to stay on that ship, but I guess ship life didn't work for him. So between Scotland and hitting Maine, he decided he'd had enough of that and did not go back to his ship. And by the time he was 12, the Civil War broke out, and he became a drummer boy. And when he wasn't drumming, he was loading rifles for the soldiers on the Union side. So your great-great-grandpappy could have been shoulder to shoulder with my great-great-grandpappy. Now, Brian, we don't want to leave you out. What do you know about your ancestry?
I had about 35 ancestors that fought on both sides.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, pretty evenly split. My reenacting name is Hiram Canutt, and that's in honor of an ancestor who was a preacher and fought with Sturman's cavalry brigade. So
did he make it?
He did. I have a picture of him after the war, holding his Bible and in a civilian frock again.
Well, that would indicate that prayer works.
Right, right. On the Union side, however, I did have a relative who died on the Sultana on the way home from the war. So he made it all through the war.
Now, where was he fighting?
He was on the Union side, and he made it all through the war, and they put him on the Sultana, which was a steamer that was sunk.
You're talking about a ship. Okay.
Right, sorry.
Gotcha.
And the ship sunk.
So he made it through all that.
And then died in that disaster. Yeah.
Okay, bummer.
Yeah.
Now, how did you, Colonel, come to join the Washington Civil War Association?
Well, it's a very long story, but
give us a
trying to
Reader's
give you a
Digest
short version. I started reenacting when I was in 1972, when I lived back on the East Coast of Baltimore, Maryland.
Oh, okay.
And after participating back there up till 1989, we moved out here to Washington State in that year. I spent several years trying to find someone interested in the Civil War here, and wasn't able to locate the Washington Civil War Association until 1993.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I first joined them. And I've been with the organization ever since.
Now, you didn't just start out as a colonel unless you're one wealthy geezer. Tell us how you went through the ranks.
Well, I started out as private like everyone else does.
Okay, so they all start out as private.
Privates for the most part, even though when I moved out here, I had in Maryland, back on the East Coast reenacting, I was of the rank of major.
Oh, okay.
But when I came out here, I just took off the starter and went back to being a private. And went from a private to ordnance sergeant, and then let's see, it was...
Now, what would be involved, because, I've interviewed a lot of World War tours and some Vietnam vets and some Korea War vets. Tell us what was involved in ordnance in the Civil War.
Well, ordnance sergeant in infantry was his main duty was to make sure the weapons were maintained properly, the long arms of the soldiers. A lot of times he was in charge of an ordnance blacksmith who would actually do repairs of the muskets right there on the field. Basically to make sure just the weaponry was fully functional so that when the soldier went into battle, his weapon was going to be fully operational.
Okay. Well, this girl went in the military and women didn't do that then. I'm old. I did a lot of typing. So do you want to talk about weapons? Now, who brought these weapons in? Was it you, Brian? Well, why don't you, I'm sure the men out there would love to see this. Pick up a couple of these pieces and tell us what you've got there. My son's been drooling over this stuff.
These are actually part of my heritage. They're Star Arms Corporation weapons. These were actually, this model here is a 36 caliber double action Star. It was patented in 1856, and Star was the first manufacturer to be granted a pattern for a double action revolver that was actually
now
contracted.
You're saying Star manufactured and you're...
One of my relatives.
Okay.
This is one of my relatives.
Oh, okay. Wonderful.
And they actually did send weapons to the South in '61, but officially they weren't supposed to do that. They were a Union arms manufacturer. 36 is the first model, and it's the rarest. Next came the 44 double action.
Now, did these belong to family members that you have in here?
No, I've had to collect all of these.
Oh, okay.
The Star Arms Company went bankrupt in 1867.
Oh, okay.
And the whole business was dissolved. Nothing was passed down through the family at all.
Okay.
So I've had to collect all the different...
This is the fortunes of
types.
war. Sometimes
Yes.
you got it, and then you lose it, and then you regain it again. Okay, now, Brian, tell us when you joined and how you found out about the Washington Civil War Association.
Well, my family, we homeschool, and my wife said, hey, there's a Civil War reenactment going on at Fort Steilacoom. So I went down there, and we watched some battles, and then I kind of disappeared. And I was talking to some of the guys, and learned more about what was going on. Walked to the camp and talked to everyone. Great group of people. And they just kind of invited me to consider joining. When I originally wanted to join, I asked about being a chaplain. I'm a missionary in real life. And my education and background is in theology. So I wanted to be a chaplain. They had a chaplain, and they said, just join as a soldier. So I came in as a private, and really liked private soldiering. It was a lot of fun. About the only place you can go out and shoot people and not hurt anybody. Exactly. And you get shot at, and it's like playing Army, only on a bigger scale. And so that was a couple of years ago. And served the 26th North Carolina, And guys found out kind of what I do and gave me the moniker, the Fightin' Preacher. And so that's kind of my persona. I'll do church services on Sunday in a period style. I have tracts that I pass out that are actual historical documents.
Oh, okay.
And the reproductions of the real tracts that we used in the South.
Well, you know, while I'm a bit of a history buff, I don't remember absolutely everything, and I don't know that movies that try to be historically accurate, they never focused on chaplains. Before a battle, for instance, would the chaplain go through and bless people? I mean, what would his duties?
Yep.
Did he always follow the regiment?
Yeah, absolutely. That was the spiritual care of the troops, and a lot of the preachers would enlist and come alongside the troops because they felt like their covenantal children were going out with no protection, facing possible death, and they needed the spiritual care of their shepherd. Most of them didn't fight. Most of them prayed in Stonewall Jackson's army. In fact, they were ordered to pray, and that was it. He wanted them in the rear and praying and not fighting. And others fought. Others felt like they had to do more than pray. Prayer was beneficial, but they felt like they really had to defend their country. But yeah, they traveled with the army. They had ranks, some of them. Some of them chose not to take rank and just be civilian attachments to the Army. So it's extremely varied in terms of the experiences that they had. Of course, the Catholics would have their priest bless the troops. I'm a Presbyterian, so we would pray for them before battle and ask God's blessing on the battle and pray for victory.
And I would imagine the painful task of praying over the dead or comforting the wounded.
Exactly, and doing funerals and all of that good work. Yeah.
Okay, so as you're going up the ranks, Colonel, what for you was the most challenging duty if you were really living back in that time? Let's get into, you have a persona now. So what would be your most difficult or challenging? Because I mean, you're big cheese. You're sending people off to war, and you know some of them are going to get killed. I mean, that's a given. What would be the most difficult and challenging?
I think persona-wise, and from what I've read of original accounts, most of the senior officers then, their biggest difficulty was watching the boys go in and watching the numbers that didn't come back. Even Robert E. Lee himself had such a tremendous hatred of that part of the aspect of war. He blamed himself for the failure of Pickett's charge, for example. And while I've never experienced real warfare, I can only imagine what that must have been like. I mean, men that you grew up with, men that you had befriended, that you shouldered arms with, and you just have to send them forward to die.
Well, that would be tough. Now, as far as the chaplain goes, would you be the one who would do the dastardly deed? Well, not dastardly, I shouldn't say that, but have to make the letters to the parents?
I think they were called on sometimes to do that, but usually commanding officer of the battalion or his direct commanding officer would take care of that and write back.
Now, since you're representing the Confederacy and having taken a history course myself, maybe you can be more accurate. Didn't the Confederates actually kill 3 times as many Northerners? Does that sound right?
It's very, very close. Especially at the beginning of the war, most of the Confederate troops were much more familiar with firearms and because of hunting and being in the field.
They were more agrarian lifestyle. They weren't living in the cities.
And a lot of the Union soldiers were basically inexperienced completely. Some of them were immigrants that had just come off the boat.
Right.
They were conscripted right into the Union Army. They had never even held a weapon in their hand. And usually they were only given 5 rounds of ammunition to use as target practice. That was all they were allotted. And you cannot learn and master Civil War musket with just 5 rounds.
Right.
And so when they went into battle, you constantly hear stories of officers telling the new recruits to aim for the knees, or aim low, because they knew inherently new recruits always shot high and would shoot over the heads of the enemy coming at them.
Now, what was the bloodiest? I mean, there were so many that was just so horrible. Do you know what the bloodiest battle was in the Civil War?
Single day was Antietam.
Oh, yeah.
Or Sharpsburg, depending on which side you were on, Union or Confederate. They named battles gave battles different names. The bloodiest overall would have to be Gettysburg, especially for loss for the South. The South never really recovered after Gettysburg.
Now, what do you believe? Because, I'm on both sides of the fence here. I've already said that my mother's family was Confederate and my father's family was Union, and we can have conversation here and agree or disagree. For the Confederates, it wasn't so much the issue of slavery. It was an issue of what is this kind of convoluted federal government telling our state to do blah, blah, blah. I don't think we're sitting here now, we don't appreciate that states seem to have more rights than what they have now, because we have to be under the domination of the umbrella of the federal government. Would both of you men comment on that?
Well, that's by coincidence. We were just discussing that on the way down here today. And it's very interesting, the dynamics that occurred at that time period. And I think Brian will agree with me that it's not just one thing you can put your finger on. There were states' rights, the slavery issue was in there. But there was also a religious aspect to the war on both sides. And Brian can explain, can give you some information on the religious end a little better than.
Okay.
I believe it was a theological war. That part of the influence of what happened there was the idea that the northern people had been very influenced by the Unitarian Church, and kind of a humanism, all men are good, and they're clashing with the South, which was much more conservative, Calvinistic, and saying that men are sinful and they need a redeemer. And so you have these two forces colliding, and what we end up with is a resistance in the South saying we're not going to change our religion, which is a base core value for many, many people, and we're not going to give it up. We're not going to allow the North to come in and invade our homes. The conservatism of the South, they wanted to preserve that, and that led to quite a clash.
I have to admit, I don't typically think in terms of religion when I think of the Civil War. Yeah.
Right. Big influence, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, did you have any ancestors that went to prisoner of war camps? I had a relative, Thomas Hart, I believe his name was, from Missouri, who got caught by the Confederacy and went to Libby prison. And his wife actually got on a buckboard from Missouri and went all the way to, I need to write a script and make a movie and become a gazillionaire. It had to be quite a story to go from Missouri to Georgia, and they did free him, but I mean, he was skin and bones. He was skin and bones, because the Confederacy was having a hard enough time supplying their troops. They sure weren't going to go overboard for the enemy. Now, you were talking about did I hear you earlier right, about a prisoner of war camp in Maryland?
Yes, I had two brothers, two relatives that were both brothers, Ashford and Farris Simmons, that fought for the 2nd North Carolina. They were at Sharpsburg, Antietam, and they were separated from their regiment. The regiment was split by terrain, and their group ended up being captured. And they were both sent to Point Lookout prison camp in Maryland. right off of Point Lookout. And when they were both exchanged, that was in '62 when they were captured. They were both exchanged, but both of them went right from the point of exchange right to Richmond Chimborazo Hospital because they were both very gravely ill. The one had measles and he died at Chimborazo 3 months after he arrived there, and the other one had, well, what they called then was consumption, but which is tuberculosis.
TB, yeah.
And he survived that stay in the hospital, was returned to duty, and then had a relapse, ended up back in Chimborazo at the time when Richmond fell. He was recaptured and sent back to Point Lookout prison. But he did survive the war, but then later on after the war, 4 years after the war, he ended up dying from tuberculosis.
Oh, so it did catch up with them.
Yes.
Did catch up with them. Now, what is the thing, Brian, that, because we're coming to an end here, what is it that you really enjoy about the Washington Civil War Association? And by the way, have you had the opportunity to leave the state? Do you do that? Do you leave the state and join up with another group for another reenactment?
Sure, I've reenacted in Oregon. That's as far as I've gone. But we do have some really great reenactments down at Fort Stevens and McIver State Park with the Oregon Club. And then, of course, we've done everything, in state that I've done. My favorite parts is being with the guys, and this comrade in arms, fighting together. The strategy is a lot of fun, and just the period, just the time of the period, the Victorian time. It's a time of chivalry and etiquette. A time that's a lot slower than we live in today.
Right.
No cell phones, no,
You're not catching the latest messages of the Civil War on CNN.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
Or if you are, it's months afterwards,
Yeah. The news traveled much more slowly.
Right.
What about for you, Colonel?
I really enjoy the camaraderie. I do enjoy the evening activities, but I think my favorite time of all is early morning, just before the sun comes up. The ground fog, and you look out through camps and you can smell the coffee and the campfires going, and it's just peaceful and quiet, and it takes you back to that period.
Now, are both of you riders? Because we interviewed Colonel John Persinger, and he wasn't too comfortable on a horse. What about you two?
I'm a foot soldier.
Oh, you're a foot soldier.
Yeah.
Huh? Okay. So you're passing the word with the shoes of peace on your
That's
feet.
right. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Colonel?
I have been on horses before several times. I don't mind them, but they don't seem to like me too much.
Oh, okay.
So I stay
gee.
on foot mostly.
Gee, I've ridden horses many times. It's been a couple of decades, but now, are your wives active in this?
Yeah, my whole family's reenactors. I have a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. They reenact, and my wife, of course. Yeah.
And does she play some specific part, or is she just the pastor's wife and goes around and sponges people's mucky foreheads?
Yeah, and she's involved in the Valley Ladies Association, which supplies pickles and lemonade and cold rags to soldiers coming off the field.
Right.
And enjoys being with the civilian corps that we have that supports us.
And what about, is your wife involved at all?
Yes, my wife is. She would have been here today, but she has some medical issues. But she has been involved with me since the very beginning when I started reenacting back on the East Coast. She's always been supportive of me and what I've done.
Right.
But in her own right, she's a very good seamstress. She designs Civil War period gowns and recreates Civil War gowns.
Okay.
She's won many awards for her designs and her creations.
Right.
And she's always been involved in the children aspect of, and she collects Civil War period clothing and children's
That must be
goods.
hard to find, I would think.
Actually, it's not. There's a lot more around than you would imagine.
Now, before we come to an end, tell us what areas in Washington you typically do Civil War reenactments, and I assume this has got to be the summer months. So people can kind of be looking in their newspapers, and you do have a web page here. It's www.wcwa.net.
Right.
So think of Washington Civil War Association and you can get the latest where they're going to be. And do take your kids to this. This is a wonderful way. This is living history.
Yes.
This is really living history, so they can get an idea of what's going on. I wouldn't recommend it for really small kids. I've been to these events and they're noisy.
Oh, yes.
Those cannons and those guns, they may be fake, but the noise is not fake, and I don't think a little child would get into that. But take them to that. Now, where do you generally have, we heard Fort Silicon,
In Spokane, Riverside Park in Spokane. We've done events in Ferndale, Evander Park in Ferndale. We've been at Merrimore Park. We've been, we're going to be doing an event this year at Port Gamble. We've done one event down at Rainier last year. We've done two at Ording, in the Ording area. And we've been over in Yakima, so pretty much across the state. Our membership covers the state.
Right. About how many members do you have? Do you know? Just in Washington State. I mean, I know that every state has a reenactment group, but about how many members do you think you have?
Just a little under 1,000.
Oh, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank both of you so much for being involved in this great living history. I really appreciate it, and I love it because I like history. But folks, sad to say, we're at war, and thank God we're not fighting each other, but we are at war, and every day we hear news about one of our men or women getting killed in Iraq. And I would ask you to pray for our troops, that God in His mercy would protect them. I mean, we know God gives us free will, but you can pray for protection anyway. And remember the families that have lost loved ones. They're still grieving. This isn't something you're going to get over in a couple of months. And remember to pray, and if you can help a family who's dealing with a wounded veteran, please do so. Do you have a closing word, Pastor?
Just that we do pray for the troops in Iraq, and pray God's mercy and grace for them.
Amen. Yeah. Okay, be good. See you next month.